Hello, ladybugs and gentle worms. I'm so glad you could join me again today, and this is my second time filming because my neighbor turned 12. So that footage was basically useless. Today we are talking about the Irish Revolt from the British. Now, there were many cultural phenomenons, attitudes, events, and subjects that led to this. But I think the fairest point that we can make is that what happened in Ireland was an emancipation from a government that didn't always have the people's best interests in mind. What do I mean by this? Let's go see. It's no secret the Irish had been in conflict with their ruling party for years. They essentially had their culture erased, language forbidden, and religion persecuted. Now, I know that is a lot of claims to make, so let me explain. When the British arrived, they were surprised to see a bunch of very poor Irish Catholics on a very small land. So in order to subject these people to their rule, they banned the use of the Irish Gaelic in professional settings. Any other dialect used other than English was met with strict punishment. At first, it hardly impacted the country at all. Gaelic was still extremely popular with lower classes. But the thing is, it lost its power because it could not be used in a legal setting. Now, Ireland was an extremely Catholic country, so when the British banned Catholics from political discourse, this was extremely debilitating. Where Catholics denied positions of power, but they were also persecuted throughout Britain's reign. For example, when the British tried to set up the Church of England, those who did not wish to convert or acknowledge the monarch as head of the church were put to death. There was also the social aspect. Many British lords looked down upon the Irish Catholic peasants and turned against the Catholics, which resulted in a lot of turbulence in the country. The British mishandled Irish in a multitude of ways, the prime example being the potato famine. While a quarter of the Irish starved to death, officials are recorded as saying it was the judgment of God that sent the calamity to teach the Irish Catholics a lesson. And it was an effective method of treating the surplus of the population. And it can also be claimed that the reason the Irish relied so heavily on potatoes was because the English taxed their grain. So when the potatoes were taken away, they had little to no food. This really did spark a lot of indignation towards the ruling class that would come to play later on. In the 1800s, they openly attacked and belittled the British presence in Ireland. These tensions eventually led to the Easter Rising in 1914. On Easter Day, revolutionaries tried to take over Dublin. This was a dramatic turn for events because insurgents honestly hadn't done anything as crazy as this. What was even crazier was Britain's response. Killed 78 insurgents and about 260 civilians they mistook to be part of the cause. Beforehand, Ireland was leaning more to a home rule, which meant that while Britain would technically be in charge, they almost had complete control over their country. But when this happened, it all changed to, we need to throw the British out. The infamous Irish Republican Army arose out of all of this. Their influence spanned far and wide, one of their sources of money actually being gangs in America. Like many groups similar to them, they soon became very radicalized. The people who were mostly part of this were young men and women who were infatuated with freedom from the British. However, it would be really naive to think that everyone thinks like this. Not everyone was the hardened rebel that is often portrayed in history books. The people who also wanted change were the everyday townsfolk. They weren't fanatic about change and government, but they also recognized the hardships that had been caused by the British, and especially after what happened in on the Easter Rising. Instead of the traditional warfare, guerrilla fighting was how they achieved their cause. The British were weakened by the sudden attacks. And Britain, yeah, they weren't in the greatest place to be fighting these revolutionaries, because they were in the war to end all wars, aka World War I. So they couldn't really put up with Ireland for as long as they might have been under other circumstances. In 1921, Ireland won its independence. They celebrated this by having an extremely long ceremony in Gaelic, which the New York Times described as a tribute to sentiment but deadening to interest. After this freedom was achieved, Ireland broke out into civil war, and the IRA remained as radical as ever. Also, the Protestants I was talking about earlier, they mostly lived in the northern part of Ireland, so they decided to still be a part of the British. That would lead to something, I can't really remember what it was, called the Troubles. Not important. After the imperialism in Ireland was so long, what was the overall effects on the small country? Well, that's easy, and it can be summed up with this teacup. Now, I know that's very confusing, and you're probably thinking, what is she saying? She sounds crazy. But the teacup is a sign of the British, basically. It's an important part of their culture. And after so many years, it became an important part of Ireland's culture. So I guess what you could say is that Ireland's culture was erased by the British and replaced with their own, which is a very, very big blow for anyone, but especially this little country that had been so unique. Now, my Nana is full-blooded Irish as they come, and she too only knows one thing in Gaelic, and that is leithries. I'm reading her text. Leithries, which means toilet. It probably doesn't help that she skipped most of her school days to read books, but she grew up in an Ireland where they were trying to figure out their identity, but it just was so lost that they couldn't. Claiming their culture was so difficult in the modern world that they kind of just had to stay the way they were. And it's a kind of a joke in a lot of media that, oh, the Irish are basically British, haha, just angrier. But it's kind of actually a dark story behind that. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this presentation. That would mean a lot to me. And I would hope that you understand I don't know everything about this rule and imperialism, because so much happened in those 500 years that I cannot recount it all in an 8-minute video. It deserves so much thought and historical due process put into it, but I don't really have that kind of time. And I'm so glad you have stopped in, and I hope you have a great day.